In the vast emptiness of the North African desert during World War II, where conventional armies clashed in battles of maneuver and attrition across hundreds of miles of sand and rock, a different kind of warfare was being perfected. Small teams of highly trained soldiers operated far behind enemy lines, appearing without warning to strike at vulnerable targets before vanishing back into the desert vastness. These were the men of the Special Air Service, the SAS, Britain's elite raiding force, and their weapon of choice was not a tank or an armoured car, but something far more modest and infinitely more versatile: the American Willys Jeep, transformed through British ingenuity into one of the most effective special operations vehicles ever created. Stripped of unnecessary weight, laden with fuel cans and water containers, bristling with machine guns mounted on improvised pedestals, and driven by men who knew the desert as intimately as any Bedouin, these modified jeeps became instruments of calculated chaos. They carried four-man teams hundreds of miles across supposedly impassable terrain to launch devastating raids on German and Italian airfields, supply dumps and communication centres, destroying far more enemy aircraft on the ground than the RAF could shoot down in the air, and creating a legend of mobile firepower and audacious aggression that would influence special operations doctrine for generations to come. This is the story of the SAS Desert Jeep, the vehicle that turned the North African desert into a highway for raiders, and the extraordinary men who drove these overloaded machines into the heart of enemy-held territory with nothing but their skill, their courage, and their guns to bring them home alive. The origins of the SAS Desert Jeep concept lie in the evolution of the Special Air Service itself and the particular challenges of operating in the North African theatre. The SAS was founded in July 1941 by Lieutenant David Stirling, a Scottish Guards officer who recognised that small teams of specially trained soldiers could achieve effects disproportionate to their numbers if they could strike at vulnerable rear area targets that conventional forces could not reach. Stirling's original concept involved parachute insertion behind enemy lines to attack airfields and other strategic targets, but early operations revealed significant problems with this method. Parachute drops were inaccurate, equipment was often lost or damaged, and extraction after the mission was extremely difficult. What was needed was a method of insertion and extraction that gave the raiders mobility, firepower, and the ability to operate independently for extended periods deep in enemy territory. The answer came from an unexpected alliance with the Long Range Desert Group, the LRDG, a reconnaissance unit that had already mastered the art of deep desert navigation and long-range patrolling. The LRDG used heavily modified trucks, primarily Chevrolets, to conduct reconnaissance missions hundreds of miles behind Axis lines, navigating by sun compass and astronomical observation, surviving on carefully calculated supplies of fuel and water, and using their intimate knowledge of desert terrain to avoid enemy patrols. Early SAS raids used LRDG trucks for transportation, with the LRDG delivering SAS teams to their targets and recovering them afterward. This partnership was effective, but it had limitations. The LRDG had its own reconnaissance missions and could not always provide transport for SAS operations, and the large LRDG trucks, while reliable and well-suited for long-range navigation, were not ideal for the kind of aggressive hit-and-run tactics that Stirling envisioned. What Stirling needed was a vehicle that combined desert mobility, reliability, speed, and enough cargo capacity to carry fuel, water, ammunition, and supplies for extended independent operations. He found it in the American Willys Jeep, which began arriving in North Africa in significant numbers in late 1941 and early 1942. The Jeep was a revelation to British forces. It was mechanically simple and extraordinarily reliable, capable of covering rough terrain that would defeat many heavier vehicles, light enough to be manhandled out of soft sand if it bogged down, and fast enough to outrun most potential pursuers. American forces used Jeeps primarily for liaison and light transport, but Stirling and his men saw something different, a platform that could be modified to carry the weapons, equipment, and supplies necessary for long-range raiding, transforming it from a utility vehicle into a mobile weapon system. The modifications made to SAS Jeeps were extensive and carefully thought through based on operational experience. The first and most obvious change was the addition of machine guns. Standard SAS practice was to mount a pair of Vickers K machine guns on a pedestal mount in the rear of the vehicle, providing a flexible weapon that could engage targets in any direction. The Vickers K was a gas-operated weapon originally designed for aircraft use, with a very high rate of fire of approximately 900 to 1,000 rounds per minute. Mounted in pairs, these guns could deliver devastating firepower at close range. Some Jeeps also mounted a single Browning .50 caliber heavy machine gun in the front passenger position, providing additional firepower and the capability to engage harder targets or suppress enemy positions at longer range. The combination of these weapons turned the Jeep into a mobile fire platform capable of dominating any engagement at close to medium range. But weapons were only part of the modification. The Jeep's range had to be dramatically extended to allow it to operate hundreds of miles from base without refueling. This was achieved by mounting additional fuel cans, typically the standard British 4-gallon jerry cans, on every available mounting point. A fully loaded SAS Jeep might carry 40 gallons of extra fuel in addition to its standard tank, effectively quadrupling its operational range. Water was equally critical in the desert environment, and additional water containers were mounted alongside the fuel. Ammunition for the machine guns, in the form of drum magazines and belted rounds, was stowed wherever space could be found. Spare parts, repair tools, personal weapons and equipment for the crew, rations, medical supplies, camouflage nets, navigation equipment including sun compasses and maps, and various mission-specific gear all had to find space on the vehicle. The result was a Jeep so heavily loaded that it sat low on its suspension, every surface covered with supplies and equipment secured with straps, rope, and improvised mounting brackets. The typical SAS Desert Jeep crew consisted of 4 men, each with specific responsibilities but all cross-trained to perform multiple roles. The driver was responsible for navigating the vehicle across challenging terrain while maintaining the speed and agility necessary for both approach and escape. The front passenger, often the patrol commander, operated the front-mounted weapon if one was fitted, navigated using sun compass and map, and made tactical decisions about route selection and target engagement. The 2 men in the rear operated the twin Vickers K guns, provided additional observation, and handled ammunition resupply during engagements. These 4 men lived in their Jeep for days or weeks at a time, sleeping beside it under camouflage nets during the day when movement was too dangerous, driving through the night across the featureless desert, sharing the discomfort, danger, and occasional moments of terrifying action that defined SAS operations in North Africa. The tactical employment of SAS Jeeps evolved rapidly through operational experience and reflected both the capabilities and limitations of these modified vehicles. The fundamental tactic was the surprise raid conducted at high speed with overwhelming firepower concentrated in a very short time. SAS patrols would spend days or even weeks infiltrating deep into enemy-held territory, navigating by night and lying up in concealed positions during the day, moving slowly and carefully to avoid detection. Intelligence on enemy positions, usually provided by LRDG reconnaissance or by aerial photography, would identify suitable targets: airfields, supply dumps, vehicle parks, or headquarters installations. The SAS patrol would approach the target under cover of darkness, positioning themselves for the attack run while remaining undetected. The attack itself was a carefully choreographed act of controlled violence. The Jeeps would approach the target at high speed, often driving directly onto an airfield or into a supply area with machine guns already firing. The twin Vickers K guns, with their extremely high rate of fire, would pour hundreds of rounds into parked aircraft, fuel bowsers, ammunition dumps, or any other valuable targets within range. The Browning .50 caliber, if mounted, would engage harder targets or provide suppressing fire against defensive positions. The attack would last perhaps 60 to 90 seconds, rarely longer, during which time the Jeeps would drive through or around the target area in a pre-planned pattern that maximized their firepower while minimizing their exposure to return fire. Then, as suddenly as they had appeared, the Jeeps would accelerate away into the darkness, using speed and the confusion they had created to escape before effective enemy response could be organized. The effectiveness of these tactics against Axis airfields in North Africa was extraordinary and well documented. Between July 1941 and January 1943, SS raids destroyed or damaged over 250 Axis aircraft on the ground, a total that exceeded the aerial victories of several fighter squadrons combined. Individual raids were often spectacularly successful. In one operation in June 1942, a patrol of Jeeps attacked the German airfield at Sidi Hanish. destroying or damaging 37 aircraft in a single night. Another raid on Benghazi harbour in September 1942 resulted in multiple ships damaged and shore installations destroyed. These successes came at relatively low cost in SAS casualties, though losses did occur and the risks were always extreme. The ratio of damage inflicted to resources committed was remarkable, validating Stirling's original concept of small teams achieving disproportionate effects through mobility and surprise. The German and Italian response to SAS raids evolved as they recognized the threat these operations posed. Airfield defenses were strengthened with additional guards, anti-aircraft guns positioned for ground defense, and more alert procedures implemented. Some airfields began dispersing aircraft more widely to limit the damage any single raid could inflict. Axis forces increased patrols in rear areas attempting to intercept SAS teams in transit. Despite these countermeasures, SAS raids continued to be effective throughout the North African campaign, adapting their tactics as enemy defences became more sophisticated. The fundamental advantage of surprise, mobility and firepower remained with the raiders as long as they maintained operational security and chose their targets carefully. The psychological impact of SAS operations on Axis forces was significant beyond the direct physical damage inflicted. The knowledge that nowhere behind the lines was truly safe, that airfields and supply installations could be attacked at any time by fast-moving raiders who seemed to appear from nowhere and disappear just as quickly, created a climate of uncertainty and forced the diversion of resources to rear area security that might otherwise have been deployed at the front. German and Italian commanders had to post guards at every vulnerable installation, conduct time-consuming searches for suspected SAS bases in the desert, and maintain constant alertness against the possibility of raids. This defensive burden, while difficult to quantify precisely, represented a real cost in military effectiveness and contributed to the overall Allied advantage in North Africa. The conditions under which SAS Jeep crews operated were extraordinarily demanding and required men of exceptional physical and mental toughness. The Western Desert was an environment of extremes. Temperatures during the day could reach 120 degrees Fahrenheit or higher, while nights could be bitterly cold. Water was always scarce and carefully rationed, with crews often operating on less than a gallon per man per day, for all purposes including drinking, cooking and hygiene. Food was monotonous, consisting primarily of tinned rations supplemented occasionally by whatever could be acquired or improvised. Mechanical breakdowns were constant problems, with vehicles breaking suspension components on rough terrain, puncturing tyres on sharp rocks, or suffering engine problems from the fine desert dust that penetrated every seal and bearing. Crews became expert field mechanics by necessity, able to repair or improvise solutions to mechanical problems with minimal tools and parts. Navigation across the featureless desert required skills that few men possessed before joining the SAS, and that took time and experience to develop. During daylight, sun compasses could provide directional guidance, but at night navigation relied on dead reckoning, using the vehicle's speedometer to measure distance travelled and compass bearings to maintain direction, with periodic checks using astronomical observation when conditions allowed. The slightest error in navigation could result in becoming lost in the desert, with potentially fatal consequences, so navigators learned to work with meticulous care, constantly updating their calculations and cross-checking their position using whatever landmarks the terrain provided. The LRDG, with its longer experience in desert navigation, provided training and mentorship to SAS navigators, passing on hard-won knowledge about reading terrain, identifying reliable navigation features, and finding the occasional desert tracks that could ease movement. The bond that formed among SAS Jeep crews was intensely strong, forged by shared danger, mutual dependence, and the isolation of operating for weeks at a time, with no contact with higher headquarters and no possibility of reinforcement or rescue if things went wrong. These men lived in each other's pockets, sharing every discomfort and every moment of tension, trusting each other with their lives every day. The loss of a crew member to enemy action or accident was devastating, not just as a tactical loss, but as a profound personal grief. Many SAS veterans who spoke about their experiences decades later recalled their crew members with an emotional intensity that time had not diminished, remembering not just their names and faces but their personalities, their quirks, and the way they handled themselves under pressure. Among the SAS leaders who pioneered desert jeep operations, Several names stand out for their tactical innovations and leadership. Paddy Mayne, an Irish rugby international and one of the SAS's most aggressive and successful raiders, led numerous jeep patrols and personally destroyed dozens of enemy aircraft. His courage under fire was legendary, and his willingness to take risks inspired the men who served with him, even as it occasionally alarmed his superiors. David Stirling himself led by example, participating in raids and constantly refining tactics based on operational experience until his capture by German forces in January 1943. After Stirling's capture, the SAS continued under new leadership, with the jeep raids remaining a central part of its operational repertoire through the remainder of the North African campaign and beyond. The mechanical reliability of the jeep itself was crucial to the success of these operations and earned the vehicle deep respect from SAS personnel. The Willys design was fundamentally sound, with a robust four-cylinder engine that was simple to maintain and repair, a four-wheel drive system that provided excellent traction in soft sand and rough terrain, and a suspension that could absorb tremendous punishment despite the overloading to which SS crews subjected it. Jeeps broke down, certainly, but they broke down less frequently than might have been expected given the conditions under which they operated and the loads they carried. More importantly, when they did break down, they could often be repaired in the field using basic tools and improvised parts. This reliability was not accidental, but the result of careful American engineering focused on producing a vehicle that was practical and maintainable rather than sophisticated and complex. The legacy of the SAS Desert Jeep extends far beyond its direct contribution to the North African campaign. The concept of using light, mobile, heavily armed vehicles for deep penetration raids became a permanent part of special operations doctrine. Modern special forces around the world continue to use modified light vehicles, descendants in concept if not in direct lineage of those pioneering SAS Jeeps that roamed the Western Desert 8 decades ago. The tactical principles developed in North Africa, the emphasis on surprise, speed, overwhelming firepower at close range and rapid withdrawal, remain fundamental to vehicular raid operations. The SAS itself continues to employ similar tactics in contemporary operations, using modern vehicles and weapons, but applying concepts that were proven in the Desert War against the Afrika Korps. The visual imagery of the SAS Desert Jeep bristling with weapons and laden with supplies, driving at speed across empty desert or racing through a burning airfield with machine guns firing, has become iconic in military history. Photographs of these vehicles and their crews, usually taken at base between operations, show men who are lean, bearded, dressed in a mixture of British and captured German clothing, sunburned and weathered, standing beside their vehicles with an unmistakable air of confidence and competence. These images have been reproduced countless times in books, documentaries, and films, becoming symbolic of a particular kind of warfare and a particular kind of soldier. The reality behind the images was far less romantic, involving weeks of discomfort, constant danger, and the ever-present possibility of a violent death far from help or support. But the images remain powerful because they capture something essential about the nature of special operations and the men who volunteer for them. The transition from North African operations to the later stages of the war saw the SAS continue to use jeeps, though the operational environment changed dramatically. In Europe after D-Day, SAS jeep patrols operated behind German lines conducting reconnaissance, ambushing convoys, and supporting resistance forces. The terrain was completely different from the open desert, with forests, roads, and villages replacing sand and empty space. But the fundamental concept of mobile firepower and aggressive raiding remained applicable. SAS jeeps in Europe were often painted in camouflage patterns rather than the desert tan of North Africa, and tactics adapted to the different environment, but the vehicle remained a valuable platform for special operations. The Jeep's versatility, its ability to perform effectively in environments as different as the Sahara Desert and the forests of France, demonstrated the soundness of its basic design and the adaptability of the soldiers who employed it. After the war ended, many SAS jeeps were disposed of through normal military channels, sold as surplus or scrapped, their extraordinary service largely unrecorded on the vehicles themselves. A few examples survived and were eventually restored by military vehicle collectors or museums, and these surviving jeeps, restored to their wartime configuration with replica weapons and equipment, can be seen today in collections across Britain and elsewhere. Seeing one of these restored vehicles provides a tangible connection to the history of SAS operations in North Africa and helps viewers understand both the capabilities and the limitations of the equipment the raiders used. The vehicles look exactly like what they were: simple, functional, overloaded machines designed to carry men and weapons into combat with the maximum reliability and the minimum of unnecessary complexity. The human cost of SAS operations in North Africa and elsewhere was significant. The SAS suffered casualties throughout the campaign, men killed in action during raids, lost to accidents in the unforgiving desert environment, or captured by Axis forces. David Stirling's capture in January 1943 was a significant blow, removing the SAS's founder and most influential leader. Paddy Mayne and others continued the work, but the loss of key personnel was felt throughout the regiment. The casualty rate among SS personnel was high by the standards of most units, reflecting the dangerous nature of their missions and the reality that operating in small groups deep behind enemy lines offered no possibility of reinforcement or rescue if operations went wrong. Yet the men continued to volunteer, understanding the risks but believing in the value of the mission and trusting in their training, their equipment, and their comrades to see them through. The relationship between the SAS and the vehicles they drove was more than merely functional. These jeeps were not just transportation but homes, workplaces and companions for men operating under extreme conditions. Crews developed personal attachments to their vehicles, naming them, decorating them with informal insignia, and maintaining them with a care that went beyond military necessity. The loss of a jeep to enemy action or irreparable breakdown was felt as a genuine loss, not just of equipment but of something that had been part of the crew's identity and survival. This bond between soldier and machine is a recurring theme in military history, but it was particularly intense in small unit operations where a vehicle might mean the difference between mission success and death in the desert. The tactical innovations developed by SAS Jeep crews influenced not just special operations but broader military thinking about mobile warfare and the value of light. Fast vehicles operating aggressively in enemy rear areas. The success of SAS raids demonstrated that strategic targets could be effectively attacked by small teams with relatively modest resources, that surprise and mobility could compensate for lack of numbers, and that unconventional approaches to warfare could achieve effects disproportionate to the resources committed. These lessons were studied by military thinkers during and after the war, and contributed to the development of doctrine around special operations, airborne forces, and rapid reaction units. Today, the story of the SAS Desert Jeep is taught in special operations courses around the world as a case study in effective small unit tactics and the intelligent exploitation of technology for military advantage. Modern special forces operating in desert environments continue to face many of the same challenges that confronted their SAS predecessors: navigation across featureless terrain, supply management, vehicle maintenance under harsh conditions, and the execution of raids against defended targets. The vehicles have changed, the weapons are more sophisticated, and communications technology allows coordination that was impossible in the 1940s, but the fundamental principles remain recognizable descendants of those pioneered in North Africa by men driving overloaded jeeps into harm's way. The legacy of the SAS Desert Jeep is ultimately a human legacy, a story of exceptional soldiers using relatively simple equipment to achieve extraordinary results through skill, courage, and tactical innovation. The Jeep itself was an excellent vehicle, but not a war-winning weapon system. What made it exceptional was how it was used by men who understood its capabilities, adapted it to their specific needs, and employed it with aggression and intelligence. The same Jeep in conventional military service was a useful utility vehicle. In the hands of SAS raiders, loaded with weapons and supplies, driven by men who knew the desert and understood the operational art of the raid, it became something far more significant. A weapon that struck fear into enemy rear areas and demonstrated that in warfare, as in so many other endeavours, it is not the size of the dog in the fight but the size of the fight in the dog that ultimately matters. The image of those heavily laden jeeps racing across the desert night, machine guns firing, explosions lighting the darkness behind them, remains one of the most compelling of the Second World War. It represents a particular kind of warfare, unconventional and aggressive, conducted by volunteers who are willing to accept extraordinary risks for the opportunity to strike directly at the enemy. It demonstrates that in the vast and unforgiving environment of the Desert War, mobility, firepower, and audacity could achieve what conventional forces could not. And it reminds us that wars are won not just by masses of men and material, but by individuals who see opportunities others miss, who improvise solutions to problems others cannot solve and who drive forward when others would hold back. This AS Desert Jeep, that simple American utility vehicle transformed by British ingenuity into a raider's weapon, stands as monument to that spirit, to the courage of the men who drove them, and to the enduring principle that in warfare as in life, fortune favours the bold.